So we discuss the topic of risk and risk analysis in the life cycle of the software. What are the prominent risks a developer might face? What are the prominent risks a tester might face? And what are the prominent risks the user might face during the usage of the software? So let's define the risk technically. What does it mean? The non-technical definition is already clear to everyone what the risk is. So we say it's a probability of occurrence of any undesirable event. Now, undesirable event means something which I have not planned, something which I could not visualize as a developer, something which is unpredictable to me. Normally, every developer should be able to visualize that what all changes the software will go through and how the software will be used by the end user and what are the possible set of the inputs the user is likely to give to the software. Not only software developers but testers and the project manager, everyone should have a thorough discussion on all these concepts. But if suppose certain undesirable event take place, then what could be the possible impact of the occurrence of that event on the client? Maybe client might suffer financial losses running into maybe millions of dollars, or it could be a small breach of data as such. So it all depends. Means we cannot just predict or we can't visualize that what could be the likely impact. Or even if there is no financial loss, there could be a loss in the credibility of the client because he is using our software and we designed the software in such a manner that certain data has been stolen or theft has taken place or the breach of the data has taken place. Now the data may not be financial data, so no loss in terms of monetary transactions, but yes, there's a loss in the credibility of the client, and then again it will give a bad name to him in the market, and he may not recommend our software to the other companies working in the same field. So the impact of the risk is too much that it cannot be assessed in just one go. It could be immense. For example, I can share my own example. I live in Ghaziabad, so nowadays I'm traveling by car, but otherwise I prefer use metro because driving takes a lot of time from traveling to and fro from Dwarka to university to my place. Now, since I've been traveling for many years by metro, I overhear many talks by our students from the IP University because in this entire track from Vaishali to Dwarka, many number of affiliate colleges of the IP University falls, like Janakpuri colleges. There are three or four colleges there. Then there are colleges in the Preet Vihar. There are colleges close to IITO also. So many students they board the metro, deboard the metro, and many of the time they talk about the colleges. They also blame the university for every mess because in our system, uh, that's how the human tendency goes. Except for me, everyone is at the fault. That is what we always believe. We never visualize some mistakes could be committed by us also. So that's how we are all like that. I think there's no one to be blamed for that matter. But then I always tell my BTech students when I teach in a class that never say any bad word about the university when you are traveling with the public transport. For the simple reason that there are many people around you who are just overhearing your talks. Now they may have nothing to do with IP University for that matter, but then they will hear these things, and then by the word of mouth, these things spread to another people also. So university, for no fault of it, suffer the loss of credibility. And I always tell them that we are the teachers, we are the employee here. Tomorrow I may shift to JNU or DU or triple IT, but then the degree from this university will be throughout with your life. So why you are degrading the quality of the degree which you are going to get from here? Then they say, sir, what we will discuss. मैंने कहा हाँ discuss everything, but don't say bad points about the university in the public transport system. Whatever you want to say, come to the campus. Whatever you want to discuss, you can discuss. You are free to do that. It's a democratic country. Whatever you feel like, you do it. Nobody is stopping you from doing it as such. Or if your matter is that grievance level, go to the student cell or talk to the dean and then sort it out. But then don't blame or don't criticize the system in a public transport system while traveling with the buses or with the metros or any mode of transport which you use as such, because it gives a bad credibility to the loss of word. And then how where it will stop, nobody knows, and the institution takes many years to build up. Even IITs, what we are seeing today, it has not just come up in one day. We all know it has taken more than 50 years after independence, and the alumni has done extremely good both in India and abroad, and that's why the IIT is reaping the fruits of their labor, because the alumni are doing exceedingly well. So there's always a risk associated with everything. Maybe it could be a tangible asset or the intangible asset. So it could be a loss of credibility, for example, the university, what we normally say, and then it could be the financial loss if certain credit card loss or the debit card loss take place on the websites. So risk can be immense. And the good tester or the good developer is one who can visualize these risks, because these risks are could be at the many levels. So we need to have a proper training, and then just like a disaster management, you can't wait for the disaster to happen and then think about now what to do, how to come out of it. You have to plan ahead. That's why we've got disaster management authority, DDMA is there. At the central government level also we've got disaster management, because they have to visualize the risk. What are the possible risks that can occur both by the man-made scenarios, man-made disasters, as well as with the natural disasters. So there are two things associated with the risk which can be enumerated as probability of the occurrence of a problem. That what is the probability? Now, if the probability is very close, for example, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's only 0.1, then it can be ignored. But the moment it comes close to 1 and then 1 plus, then yes, the problem need to be sorted out right at the genesis, right at its origin, because we cannot take the risk of delivering a software that has known problems, where problems have been ignored because the deadlines had to be met, and then we should ignore it from it. Many companies do that because just they want to deliver that software in time to the client, and they say okay, minor faults can be still be detected later and they can still be tested later, and then but we should deliver the software first. Second is what could be the impact of that problem or event on the client. So that's another problem, because if the impact is going to be very much, it's better to delay the delivery of the software if possible, provided if the MOU is signed in such a manner that yes, delayed delivery can be acceptable, and because it's better to delay the things rather than to mop up or doing the wrap up or doing certain steps just to protect your own integrity later on. It's always better to delay and tell to the client that yes, there are certain flaws that still need to be tested and debugged, and then they can wait for another 2 to 3 days or maybe 2 to 3 weeks, depend upon the software which is going to be designed and developed. So once the risk has been identified, now we need to go for the analysis of that particular risk. So we say unexpected behaviors of a software programs, and they always carry huge information, and most of the information that may disturb one or more of the team members, if we talk of the development scenario as such. Now these unexpected behaviors could again be many. We'll take some of the examples, and I will also ask you to give of your own example from the industry or the companies in which you are working. Then after we can elaborate more good number of the risk which a software developer can face or the user can face or the tester can face. And no one likes such unexpected behavior, and everyone prays that they never face the situation in their professional careers. So they do identify certain problems, but they always believe that it may not happen to them or they may not suffer to them. For example, when we fall ill, the first thing what we say to the God is, why me? What wrong I have done? Now there is no definite answer to these kind of problems or these kind of situations. Or there could be if I'm driving a car is always a risk. Even driving any vehicle on the Indian roads, I think it's all across the world, or every road is a risk, because you may not commit any problem, but there are people driving ahead of you and there are people driving behind you. Due to their mistakes also, the accident can still happen as such. And then we know the Indian roads, we know the pedestrians, we know the cycle rickshaws, we know cycle. They can take right turn or left turn without any indication. They abruptly take a right turn, and then all the blame is always on the vehicle which is larger in size. So if there is an accident between the scooter and a car wala is to be blamed, and if there is an accident between the cycle rickshaw wala and the scooter wala will be blamed. So driving on a road is always a risk, and then we always take risk whenever we drive, because it's always vulnerable on the Indian roads. some of the examples which I want every one of you to, those who are working in the industry, what could be the probable examples of the risks? So you can unmute yourself and say, and let me jot it down. Yeah. What could be the possible examples of the risk analysis? I hope I want a better cooperation with everyone.
Sir, understanding of customer requirements by as a software person, getting their perspective if it's right or not
Okay, so we said
according to our understanding.
understanding of the customer requirements. And what other risks you can think of?
A bigger risk is could be loss of credibility with the customer if some very critical bug is left in the software.
Okay, loss of credibility and
Sir,
we can have one by one so that no problem is created. Yeah. And
sir, sometimes the BA is also not clear about the work, but they want it without test cases, without
mm, briefly precise it, but means what should be the single statement we can write. Don't elaborate that much. Anyone else who can contribute to it?
sir, budget changes or budget issues or timeline
You
issues.
can say budget issues. Okay.
Budget issues and then the timeline issues.
Okay.
Lack of
Sir,
domain knowledge.
That's the biggest. That I should write on the number one.
Right.
And
So version issues.
sir, unexpected number of customers and servers are not capable to handle it.
okay,
Such changes to requirements,
just
frequent changes
just a
to
moment. Let me
requirements.
jot it down. Come again. What is the unexpected number?
Unexpected number of customers and servers are not capable or to handle it. For example, सर 4 and 5 को Netflix को फ्री था और अब उसके बाद अब कस्टमर ज्यादा हो गए उसके बाद उन्होंने नोटिफिकेशन दे दिया कि जब भी नेक्स्ट टाइम अवेलेबल होगा तो हम आपको नोटिफाई करेंगे.
But they should have visualized it, isn't it, when they're launching such a scheme?
बट सर कस्टमर को पता नहीं होता ना सर एकदम से कस्टमर उसको कस्टमर इतने आ जाएंगे उसको मतलब जिसको सॉफ्टवेयर बनवाना है तो उसको नॉलेज नहीं है कि कस्टमर एकदम से आ जाएंगे.
अच्छा, now everyone is all actually participating. Netflix ने ऐसी स्कीम क्यों लॉन्च की होगी?
I guess, sir, they were doing boundary test. Maybe. They were checking how much load they can take or they can handle. Maximum load they must be trying to do.
नहीं सर, ये this is a lower
मे बी
based
कि
concept.
ना वो ये चेक करना चाहते हो कि कितने पर्सन है ना इंटरेस्टेड है हमारी फैसिलिटी को अवेल करने के लिए.
पर इंडिया में तो अगर आप फ्री कुछ भी ऑफर करोगे तो जिसको नहीं भी रिक्वायरमेंट है ना तो भी उसको एक्सेस कर लेगा.
Exactly.
बिकॉज यहाँ पे
Right.
तो हमारा लोग माइंडसेट ही ऐसा है ना. We are groomed in that kind of environment. Anything which is offered free of cost, whether it is required by me or not, I still grab it. As simple as that. और क्या रीजन हो सकता है?
सर बहुत से तो ये भी तो चेक कर सकते हैं ना कि सर ये इस पे होता क्या है और क्या मतलब इसकी इतनी पॉपुलैरिटी क्यों है.
Sir, maybe the reason could be just another marketing strategy. For example, if user started buffering the online content on Netflix, so 2 दिन के बाद he or she may be having the urge to continue, and that's time they'll eager to buy the plan. So maybe that could be one of the
Yes,
reasons.
the same concept as in it was used in Jio with Jio 3 months first 3 months free, then whole India is hooked up with that. So,
Absolutely, to a larger extent, correct. Because
Right.
those who could not get the access, what they did do, they took your email ID and then they will notify you at later point of time, maybe 1 week after or 2 week after. Now you can still enjoy that for 2 days. Thereafter they will start pinging you. They will keep on sending notification. That's like we see now most of the apps say, oh, we have not seen you for so many days. Where are you? Now they have got access to our IP address, the MAC address, the email address, and they will keep on after for the next 6 months. You will keep on getting notifications because you have shown your interest once and they have trapped your credentials. Now they will be after you. And even if, let's say, 10 lakh people could not access the Netflix yesterday, at least 5 lakh could have registered that yes, they will get a notification for 2 days, maybe this week or next week. Now, out of these 5 lakhs, maybe in the next 6 months, at least 1 lakh will register for the Netflix. They will subscribe for it. And then this marketing strategy is one, because that's a free gimmick, and that I think work across all the countries. It's not only the Indian mindset. The free thing works across all the. It's a human tendency where whichever thing is offered free. We have seen in the US during the pandemic when the Black Lives Matter movement was there, the way the people reacted, they looted the stores in the US, in all major cities, Miami, Los Angeles, where New York, everywhere. And they were the developed countries, almost having far better per capita income what we are having in India. But moment they got a chance, they looted the all branded stores, and it was all there on the web as well as on the televisions. So moment we get a chance, we will access the things which are available, whether it is legally or illegally. So Netflix case is more like a marketing gimmick and rather than anything else. So coming back to the risk, what are the other risks we can say? An unexpected number of users can also be seen by the CBSE. Whenever CBSE results get declared, their site crashes up. It's almost every year that happens when the 10th and 12th class result declares up. Then these are things that are likely to happen. And what else we can say? So we quickly recap important issues again. Class, we all know it's a very important aspect in object-oriented programming. It's a collection of two main things, the member variable and the member function, which should be very judiciously declared within the class. It should not be on the fly basis, should not be randomly declared. The programmer, the developer should spend certain amount of time logically thinking what are the variables that should be declared in a minimum form and what are the possible lines of code likely to be written in the functions. So we say if the implementation or a behavior, that means the code written within the member function, is as per the specification, then it is expected that every instance of the class would behave in the specified way. Because if you have written the root code correctly and it is meeting to the all the stuff of the SRS, it is compliant to the specifications of the SRS, then there should not be any problem at all. And if the one instance is behaving in a nice manner, so will all the instances of that class that will work in the same manner, because the same code will get executed multiple number of the times. And we also know in object-oriented programming, whenever we instantiate a class, that each and every class share the same copy of the member function, but then maintains a separate copy of the member variables. We should always remember these things when we are dealing with the object-oriented programming. Moving on, it's very similar to the unit testing of a conventional system. So in our last lecture, we have discussed about the unit testing, and the class testing is also said almost on the same lines. If you're doing a unit testing, it's almost similar to the class testing. And just like in the unit testing, we require the concept of the stubs and the drivers for testing a unit, and sometimes it may also require significant amount of the effort. Similarly, classes also cannot be tested in the isolation. For example, if I've got a base class and then the derived class coming out from the base class, and there are two further child class coming out from derived classes, so they all have to follow certain specification when you're doing with the inheritance. Something about we discussed in the unit testing also, same concept applies to the class testing also. So there was a concept of driver and stub in unit testing. The additional source code which is likely to be written to handle the activities of the unit X, we called it as a driver in the unit testing, and all additional set of the source code which can vary from 1 or 2 lines to maybe 8 to 10 lines of code to handle the activities of both the unit A and the B is called as a stub. So we're talking of the additional source code which might be required to be written for testing one of the unit as a independently. So we can have the discussion on the same diagram again for the unit testing what we have. Let us say unit Y is to be tested independently. No, but it's a problem with the unit Y. It is a subclass or it's a subunit of the unit X, and there are two further units A and B that are child of the unit Y. So unit A and B are the derived classes of the unit Y. So if I want to test the unit Y independently, then additional source code need to be written for the unit X, same with the unit A and the unit B, and that is what we call the driver and the stubs. So if you look at the unit X, if unit X is a base class or the base unit, and unit Y the derived unit, there are certain amount of data that will be accessed by unit Y from the unit X. It is something like when we inherit the qualities from our parents. Some of them are good qualities, some of them are bad qualities, whatever the qualities are. It's our family tree, so you get to inherit everything from your parents as such, and then you pass on the same thing to your kids. So unit Y will pass on the same data to the unit B. It's same thing applies for the genes and chromosomes. So whatever we inherit from the parents, they have further inherited from their own parents, grandparents, and goes on. And certain genes become active, certain genes become dormant in the process, but then the inheritance goes on and on and on. Now, if we map the same diagram of the unit testing to class testing, the only thing that we are likely to change is that unit will be replaced by the classes. But we also need to add certain additional source code in the units. So unit X will now be called as a driver X. So additional source code which is going to be written like designing of some user interfaces to test a particular unit. Initially the user interface may not have been there, so additional source code might have to be written up. The additional source code might have to be written up. So this can create a problem in the entire life of the software as such, because how long you will write the code, and will that code be good enough, or is that code sufficient enough? So driver and stuff says write the optimum lines of code. Don't write too long of code. For example, if you look at the second level, the unit Y under test, this is a note. This unit to test it independently. To test it independently, we require to design some user interfaces here, which we can see on the left hand side, right? So this is the additional code has to be done. Now this is called as a driver X. Same way, there could be additional source code which might be written for the A and B also. So these child classes in reference or in context of the unit Y are called as stub. So the base class will be called as a driver, and these will be called as the stubs. The additional source code might be written. Now it might be, it may not be. But yes, if you want to test it independently, then yes, you will have to make sure that whatever it receives as an input from here should be passed on to it. And whatever the two output it is producing for the two child classes, they should be produced as the same output. So this is what we call the driver and the stub. So driver is primarily meant for the superclass, and the stub is primarily referred as a keyword for the subclasses when we talk of this as a main context class. And what is this process called as a scaffolding, what we discussed in the unit testing. So here in the case of the class testing, the unit's word will be replaced by class. So we'll have the class A, class B, and the class B is accessing the data or the information from the class A and then passing it on to the class C and the class D. So class A becomes my driver class for the class B, and the class C and class D become the stubs class for the class B. And this process of entire creation of the driver and the stub is called as a scaffolding. That's a technical name given in software testing as a subject to this process of concept creating the driver and the stubs in reference to a single class. So my parent classes, my super class, the additional source code which I am writing in them becomes a driver, and all the additional source code which I write in my derived classes becomes the stubs. Now we move on and we say how should we test a class. Now there cannot be any definite answer for it in the literature, but yes, there are certain hypotheses which have been proposed with how should we test a class. So we want to test the source code of a class. That's the first thing we need to do. And there are techniques available to do it. They are called as the validation and the verification technique to test the code efficiently. Now, validation and verification we have also discussed when we were not discussing object-oriented testing technique. So one is something at the start of the development phases, and one is at the end of the development phases. So again, we will have a quick recap of those two also. We may review the source code during the verification and may be able to detect a good number of the errors. Now, software testing, or rather any program or subject, uses the word errors, but my personal perception as a programmer is error is something which is thrown by my environment, something like my peripheral devices of my system, like mouse, keyboard, MICR, OCR, printers, the operating system. Like we say, like my environment throws me the problem, like the JVM, Java Virtual Machine, throws me a problem, or the operating system runs out of memory space, or my any of the hardware and the software which is beyond my control as a programmer, my environment throws a problem. That is what is something called the errors. And whatever other software related issues, they should always be referred to the word exceptions. So if I'm writing a code and that might create a problem in the future, then it should not be called as an error, it should be called as an exception. And exceptions can be managed, exceptions can be handled, exceptions can be mitigated. But you cannot provide a solution to the errors. You can't do it. So that's a line of difference we say between exception and the errors. You can provide a solution to the exception, you cannot provide a solution to the errors. Errors are something which is beyond my control as a programmer, and if they have to happen, they will happen, and then I can provide a solution to those kind of the things. So I wanted to use the word exception here, but then but I did not change it because the subject talk uses the word error, so I still went ahead with the word error, but I thought we should discuss it that errors are something we cannot reduce, cannot minimize, cannot eliminate. That is why we have got the statement as exception handling and not error handling. You cannot handle the errors, but you can only handle the exceptions in a programming language. Then there is a lot of reviewing practices nowadays. So reviews are very common in practice, but their effectiveness is heavily dependent upon the ability of the reviewers. So domain knowledge, what we say, a person has to be really good in the domain knowledge. Now domain knowledge could be both technical in nature, or it could be the expert in that particular field. For example, if I'm designing and developing a software for an insurance company, so I need to have financial expert or insurance expert to guide me, because terminologies I may not be familiar with, the insurance policies, the premiums, the maturity date, there are many other terminologies specific to the insurance sector. Same way, there are many terminologies specific to the banking sector. There are many terminologies specific to the aviation sector. So we require a domain expert who may be non-technical, but yes, has a good knowledge of the particular field. So timely reviews are very much required, both internally by the technical experts, even by the non-technical experts. So this was a quick recap of the verification and validation which we have discussed, and the same concept applies to non-object oriented as well as the object oriented testing. So in terms of verification, we say it is a process of evaluating the system or a component to determine whether the product of the given development phase satisfy the conditions which were imposed at the start of the phase. So whether whatever you are doing with the lines of code which a developer is writing and the testing team is doing the testing, is it following or conforming to the specification which were decided beforehand, that is at the start of the phases. And if you look at the validation side, it is a process of evaluating a system or a component during or at the end of the development process to determine whether it satisfied all the specified requirements or not. So that's a very thin line of difference between the verification and validation. One talks of the starting and one talks of the ending. Another difference, verification is all manual testing and involves only looking at the documents in order to ensure what comes out is what was expected to get. And in the terms of validation, it is a dynamic testing technique and requires a machine for the execution of the program. And since the program will execute, we might experience failures, and we need to identify the causes of such failures and why did the program fail, what were the likely reasons for it. That all becomes a part of the validation as such. Then we also talk something called the test drivers in the object-oriented testing. So after writing the test cases for a class, we must design a test drivers to execute each and every of the test cases, and also need to record the output of the every test case. So once you design a test case, you execute them, and then you also need to record the output of the every test case. So for example, if you remember the test ng what we did for database testing, we connected to the MySQL server, and then if there any problem arises, it will immediately throw the exception. Okay, your code was having a flaw at that particular line of the code. So we need to design a test case in such a manner that the proper seamless testing can be done, and the test case output should also be recorded. And the test driver has a tendency to create one or more instances of the classes to execute a test case. And we should always remember that classes are tested by creating a unique instance for each and every class, and also testing the behavior of those instances, whether it conforms to the specification or not. So if you have tested one instance of the class successfully, chances are that other instances of the classes also work in a same manner only. So proper testing has to be done at least of minimum one instance of every class. Then the big question that comes is, how should we test a class? What should be our strategy, or what should be our way out to test a particular class? So one option is that just like a unit testing, we may test it independently as a unit, or maybe cohesively as a group of a system. So that is again left to the individual testing teams and the developers to test their classes. Now, for example, in Java or that matter, or any other programming language, if you talk of Java and C#, Java creates a package, C# creates the namespaces. So we create a class, and that class become a part of the package. So if I want to test a class, I am testing individual class of a package, or I may want to test an entire package, which could be a collection of, let's say, 8 to 10 classes and interfaces. So it depends upon me, how do I want to test a class, maybe as an independent unit or as a group of the entire system. So decision is dependent upon two main things. First is, what is the amount of the effort required to develop a test driver, and severity of a class in a system means what is the importance, what is the criticality of the particular class in the system, and the associated risk with it. For example, we see all QR codes nowadays. So if say I'm writing a code for the integration of this code in my software, existing software. So this is a very important part, because if the scanning fails, the entire software falls flat, because then product cannot be sold. Also, no payment will be able to be successful. So scanning of the QR code is very important in the life cycle of the point of sale software. So every software will have very critical, some issues will be very critical, and that need to be identified, so the proper testing can be done of those particular classes or the lines of code written in those classes. Now, if the class has been developed to be a part of the class libraries, so we are talking of the executables here, thorough testing is essential, even if the cost of developing a test driver is very high. So there are many of the companies in Europe which design off-the-shelf components. For example, if you work in IDE like Eclipse, you download the plugins. So those plugins are predefined executables available in the class file or the .com file or the .exe file, and you just integrate in your IDEs. So if I'm a part of a team and working in a company who is designing and developing a plugins, so proper testing has to be done, even if the cost of developing that particular test driver is very high, but because it's going to be provided as a over-the-shelf component to the users. So class should be tested by its developer after developing a test drivers, and the developers are familiar with the internal design for the particular software, complexity, and the other critical issues of the classes under the test. And this knowledge will always be very helpful to design a test case and develop a test drivers for those test cases as such. The developer should also always work in close coordination with the testing team, which we always said. Then only proper testing of the software can be done. And the class should always be tested with respect to its specification, because the specification already written in the SRS. So whenever class is being tested, the lines of code which have been written, like the if condition, while loop, do while, for, switch case, and the logic which you are writing in those function, what we call business logic, that should be it should be in synchronous, or it should conform to everything what has been written in the specification. And supposedly, if certain unspecified behavior has been implemented, at times it may happen we may not be able to test them. Now this could be deliberately done by certain programmers who want to, let's say, make sure, because they have certain grudge with the company, and what they will try to do, that they will induce certain lines of code which might create problem in the actual development and the design and the development of the software, or may result in the delayed delivery of the software. So that behavior which was not there in the SRS initially, but has been manually induced by the developers because they were having certain issues with the company, then it may happen that it might get it may not never get tested up, because he will never reveal such a lines of code which might create a havoc in the future. And we should always be very careful of what additional functionalities are being specified, and anything which is not specified should not be done. So simple bit of advice, generally such practice of adding more functionalities should be discouraged. So the developers and the testers should clearly conform to the SRS which has been decided beforehand, and they should discourage themselves or refrain themselves from adding more functionalities during the development phases of the software. Now let's take a comparison which I thought of multiple languages and the issues that can crop up between them when we are doing object-oriented testing. So let's take an example of C++ on one side and Java and C# on the other side. Though all three of them are object-oriented languages, but how internal features vary across these languages, and that creates a problem for the object-oriented testing. For example, there could be many differences between these two era of languages, C++ on one side and Java and C# on the other side. Some of them I have jotted down, if you look at the Java, import of packages or using namespaces, there we include the preprocessor directives like hash includes, and here we use import or using. Then C++ provides the static linking, Java and C# provides a dynamic linking. Then in C++ main function is outside the class, in Java main function goes inside the class, so in the C#. Then in C++ arrays are by default static in nature, but here we got a dynamic arrays by the name of the vectors. Then C++ provide multiple inheritance, Java and C# provide a single inheritance. In C++ we got operator overloading. Here, because of the disadvantages of the operator overloading, Java and C# does not support them. Then you got a friend class and friend function which is supported in the C++, but Java does not provide support because we have discussed it once. Once you're using a friend class and friend function, it provides a way to access the private content of a class. And for this reason, both Java and C# does not use the friend classes and friend functions. Then in C++, by default, there is no support for database connectivity. Nowadays, we got C++ DB libraries for Sybase, for Oracle. We can download them and then carry out lines of code of connection between the C++ and databases. But initially, it was not there. Whereas in case of Java and C#, extensive support is there. For example, in JDBC and Hibernate, we use for Java, and ADO.NET we use for C#, ActiveX data objects. Then again in C++ we do not have a web-based support, but in the case of Java we have got an extensive web-based support, like let's say we have got Servlet, JSP, Struts, Hibernate, Spring, Velocity. So many tools and technologies are for the advanced Java. So web-based support is there. Another prominent difference, C++ does not provide the support for threading by default, but in the case of Java, support for the creation of the thread is there. And just to have a quick recap, when I want to create a thread in Java, there are two ways. Either I extend my class from the thread class, or I make my class implement the runnable interface. So with the help of these two things, I can go and create the thread in my class. So when you talk about the object-oriented testing, so if you're designing a test case, the test case has to look at the difference between the same object-oriented languages. Both C++ is also object-oriented, and so is a Java. So test case is also dependent on the underlying programming language I am using. If I'm writing a code for the design and development of the software in C++, my test case requirement is different, as well as if I'm writing a code in Java or C Sharp, my test case requirement will be different, because the underlying technicalities are so much that something is supported in one case and something is not supported in the other. For example, my test case will talk of multiple inheritance when we talk of C++, but there's nothing in the case of the Java. And the other major basic difference which we say are the concept of static and dynamic linking. For example, when we talk of the static linking, if you take the C and C++, for example, when we say hash include iostream.h or hash include stdio.h or hash include conio.h, now this is we call it a preprocessor directive. Now, what purpose they will serve? If I'm using a predefined function like operator like cin, cout, or the function, sorry, the printf and the scanf function, and when I compile a program .c or .cpp program, so only forward declaration of these member function is checked within the header files, whether it is existing or not. And if it is, it will go and create the .obj file, the .object file. Now then .object file will send to linker. What will the linker do? Already the executable code of these predefined function is present in the libraries, so it will add that append or add that code to the code which has just been there already in the .obj file. So in linker will take two things as input, the .obj file and the executable code of the predefined function which are being used in a program, and create a new file called as the .exe file. Now this .exe file is completely independent of the underlying environment. So you can take this .exe file to take any operating system, Mac, Sun, Solaris, OS2, PalmTop. The exe file carries the environment with it. So whatever is required for the execution, it is carrying it. And that was the biggest advantage of creating the .exe file was in the static linking. But in the case of dynamic linking, what has been done, many of the things are left to the environment in which the program will execute before the final output is shown to the user. So now when we are writing a code in Java or in the case of C Sharp and I'm using the packages, so only one time compilation is done, and that we say is a flyby compilation. So we don't have a two phases of compilation and linking what was there in the C and C++. We have got only one phase. That's why we create only one file, the .class file. Where C and C++ created two files, the .obj and the .exe. But now only one time compilation will be done, that too on the flyby basis. And majority of the things which is required, like the definition of system.out.println or the arrays or the vectors or the so many number of the java.auth packages are the AWT packages, the frames and the panels and everything. The relevant code will directly be provided as a reference during the execution of the program, but the code will never get appended to the class file. So we have left many things to the runtime environment. The IDE will take care of these things. Now this has drastically led to the reduction in the size of the code, because the .exe file code was carrying an entire environment with it. As a result, the file size was much more larger. But in the case of the .class file and which we create in Java, the very less lines of code are there, and majority of the thing will be resolved at the runtime. Where in the case of the C and C++, things were already set at the compile time. So they were more compiler strongly focused on the efficiency part, and that's why they create two files for it. But in the case of Java and C#, we wanted to reduce the number of files. We also wanted to reduce the size of the file, because most of the files were sent from the client to the server or server to the client. So web based transmission of the files was required. The number of files were drastically reduced, but cut down by half, and also the lines of the code were reduced. So what we said, majority of the things will be resolved at runtime, and the runtime environment will take care of it. So we got a Java runtime environment, and which will provide the Java virtual machine that will make sure that all the relevant code will be resolved at the runtime, and the final output will be shown to the user. So there is a huge shift in the strategy from the static to the dynamic linking. The second point we have discussed, preprocessor directive, so nothing more to add. Now another thing which we already discussed earlier, main function was outside the class, here the main function inside the class. So when we're dealing with the test cases, we have to take care of this. And also the focus on the earlier languages, C and C++, was that 30% of the code was provided as a predefined inbuilt plugin code, and 70% of the code was expected to be written by the programmer. But now in modern day programming languages, 70% of the code is already predefined built-in plugin available, but you must have a knowledge that what are these libraries, what are these packages that need to be called, and only relevant 30% of the code has to be required to be written by the programmer. And if you talk of the further the scripting languages, they further make it almost 80-20. 80% of the code is built in, but you must have a knowledge of the predefined library that is available and the predefined set of the functions to be called in your program. And then the only bare minimal code has to be written by the programmer. So if you look at the comparative case, it will be a huge shift in the object-oriented world, even among the languages. And another problem that arises is the interoperability. For example, what happens if I make my C++ program to communicate with a Java program? Both of them are object-oriented. And can a C++ program produce an output which can go or which can be served as an input to a Java program? Same way, the output of a Java program being served as an input to a C++ program. We require a huge amount of the interoperability issues because majority of the features of these two languages are different from each other. So if you just Google, a lot of work is now being done in the area of interoperability, how I can make my C program communicate with Java, or Java program communicate with a C, or C++ program communicate with Java, or Java program communicate with the C. So Java has done some effort. So if you are interested in that, I can share with, like JNI is there, Java Native Interface Mechanism. A good feature is there. Then we also got a RMI and Corba architecture. If you have heard about it, the remote method invocation is the RMI, and Corba Common Object Request Broker architecture. These are the mechanisms or these are strategies provided by the Java programming language to handle the interoperability issues between the programs which are designed and developed in the different programming languages. So that is all about the object-oriented testing. We'll discuss another tool in our lab now. We have discussed the JUnit earlier. We have discussed the PMD, Programmable Mistake Detector. We discussed the TestNG, and another tool which we'll discuss today is the Selenium, which a majority of you have already written about it in your minor exams. So we thought I thought we should do it at the last, but then we'll discuss it so that if you've already done it, good. So you already know about the tool. However, if you have not done it, so I will give a demo of it so that you can have a look at it and how you can download and integrate in your systems. So Selenium is a very simple portable framework tool for testing of the web-based applications, and introduced way back in the 2004, so around 16 years back, by Jason Huggins from ThoughtWorks. And we can download and integrate the plugin on the Mozilla Firefox. So it's better to use the Mozilla Firefox for search, but I don't say it's a compulsory to use, but you will have to search for the plugin for Google Chrome or the Internet Explorer so that you can work with them on your system. So let's have a demo of it, how it works like. Simple to understand, easy to use tool. So we go to the Mozilla site, and then we need to download the plugin. I hope it is visible, the browser.
Yes, sir.
So we need to download the Selenium IDE plugin, and then since I've already integrated in my Mozilla Firefox, it is showing remove. In your case, it will say edit, right? So you just need to follow two clicks further, and then it will integrate it to your Mozilla Firefox. And then once you have done it, on the right hand side, you will be able to see the small toolbar icon for this Selenium. Once you integrated the plugin into your browser, the Mozilla Firefox browser. So the Selenium IDE will start coming in here. So what we can do now, this is a web-based. So let's scan some of the websites for it. So what better to take than our own website. So what do? We open the ipu.ac.in. So I copy the URL from here, site to be tested, or we can have our own site and then you can test it up. So we click on Selenium IDE. So it will show this dialog box. What you would like to do: record a new test in a new project, open the existing project, create a new project, close Selenium IDE. So let us say we do it in a new project, the first option. So we can give a project name. So let's say we give the name of the subject software testing, and then we click on the OK. Now then it prompts me, before you can start recording, you must specify the valid base URL for your project, and your test will be started by navigating to this URL. So in the base URL, we give the URL of our website, the university website, ipu.ac.in, and we click on the start recording button, right? So it opens the website, and then we can see it start displaying the message, Selenium ID is recorded. Now you can navigate through the website. It is recording it right now. So you can click on anywhere. Let's say this is the admission notice for postgraduate diploma in data analytics. We click it here, and we can see the message gets displayed here. Then we scroll back. We click on our HCM chapter portal. So we just scroll it down, and then click on some notices and circular. So it will display latest counseling notices for students. So means you can take any website for that matter. If you define for your own company website, or if you design your own web page, you can just navigate and perform certain clicks here and there. If there are certain text boxes, you can enter the data. For example, let's say if there is any notice regarding to weekend program, so we can go to search links and write the word weekend. If there will be notices displayed, it will display, otherwise there are no latest notices which are displayed for the active notices. And then we can go back after we have done something here, and we can see here whatever actions we have performed on the website, it has displayed for here. Open, set window size, click, we perform certain clicks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then we type the weekend word that has got trapped here, and set this so around. They're available here. So once we have done the recording, then there's this right hand side, there's an icon here, stop recording. So we click over it, and then it will ask us to test name. So we can say our website which we have tested, and then we can click on the OK button. Now there are options here. If you look at the toolbar, we have got to run all test, then run current test, and then the test execution speed. So you can increase or decrease as per way you like it. So let us click the first one, the run all test. So now it will run all the tests whatever we have done on the website. All the tests will be done. It will recorded, will be displayed, and then we can see on the window and the log part running a website open is OK, green colored OK, that means that is fine. Set window size, that is OK. Click on the CSS, the cascading style sheets, OK, and then it will do it. So it's a very small, easy to use tool, lightweight tool, which can be used to test any particular web page or the website or the entire website collectively as a one go. So we start off with the topic of the automated test data generation. This is also a good exciting topic in software testing, which was not there initially in the course, but it has been added later on because there are certain tools which have evolved over a period of time that caters to this topic of the automated test data generation. So we'll go through this topic and try to understand that what is this concept and what are the various static and the dynamic techniques that are available for doing this job. Now, before we launch ourselves on this topic, we need to understand what was the necessity for it. बिकॉज किसी भी चीज़ की आने से पहले उसकी रिक्वायरमेंट जनरेट होंगी तभी वो टेक्नोलॉजी या टूल्स या एप्लीकेशन इवॉल्व होके आएंगे. सेम वे व्हाट वाज वी नीड टू रियलाइज द इम्पोर्टेंस दैट व्हाई व्हाट वाज द नीड फॉर emergence of this topic in the software testing subject. What was the need for going for automated test data generation? So there are some of the possible questions which we need to explore and find the answer to. First and foremost, which we have been saying it for quite long now, is it possible to generate the test data automatically? Because if you are able to do it, a lot of the work of the programmers, the coders, the developers and the testers will be reduced. So why not there be a tool which can do the test automatically for me? And because generating the test data requires proper understanding of the SRS document, what we call software requirement specification document. So we got a pure fledged IEEE SRS format for it. Then we got a software design document, SDD document, and a tester also need to be, I don't say he should be efficient, but he should have a knowledge of the programming language, good knowledge of the programming language, so they can understand the source code of the software. Not completely, he doesn't have to write a code, but then testing can be done only once you know the internal working of it. Not to larger extent, but yes, he or she should have a knowledge of the coding. How does the coding happen? So another question that arises, how we can automate the process of writing the test cases? Because we have seen in the structural and the functional testing techniques where we have been writing a test case on our own, like for boundary value analysis, for mutation testing, we wrote our own long test cases for it. So how we can try to automate the process of writing the test cases? Even for the cause effect graph, you need to have a good knowledge of all those symbols, identity and exclusive OR, and then you can use the graphical symbols to write the test cases for testing any of the programs using a cause effect graphing technique. And another question which is likely to come up, what is the effectiveness of such automatically generated test suite? Because if we adopt them, then the big question mark that will come is what is not only the accuracy, but what is the effectiveness of doing it in a longer generation? Because it's more like outsourcing work where a tester is using the automated test tool for getting the things done and not doing it on his own. So no manual work, more of using automated test tools. Because we do not have a source code of this testing tool, we do not know how they are working internally. We are just using them. So there are certain open source testing techniques and there are certain proprietary ones. And is it really beneficial in the practice in the long run for handling any of the SDLC projects? Another question that comes up, how can we automate the process of generation of the test cases or test data? So if we have taken a decision that yes, we need to go ahead, then the next question that comes is how we can actually do it. So how to make it happen? So how we can automate the process of going ahead with it? Another question that likely to come up is what is the simplest way to generate the test data randomly? Those of you who are working in a programming language, we have got something called PRNGs, pseudo random number generators, with the help of which we are able to generate a sequence of random numbers using a seed values. So we need to say the start value and the end value, and then it generates a pseudo random numbers for us. So how we can generate the test data randomly, meaning without considering any internal structure or functionality of the software. So we're not worried about what is happening internally, but we would like to generate some test data on the random basis. Now, when we do a research work in any of the fields, there are two kinds of data we normally handle with. First is the synthetic data, what we call the artificial data, which we generate on our own. Another is the real-time test bed data, which is carried out in the experimental basis. For example, if I'm doing a research work on COVID-19 patients, so one option is that after I have designed and developed the algorithm for the analysis of the data, now I require real-time test data for the COVID-19 patients. So one option is that I contact any of the hospital like Max or Fortis or any other hospital, and I contact them and I ask them that I require a real-time test data of your COVID-19 patients for carrying out my experimental or research purposes. Now they may share, they may not share. So if they share, it's good. My algorithms, once I do the analysis of it, it will be best. The results will be accurate because I've taken a real-time test bed. Let's say I have, after I've designed, I'm doing a work in data warehousing and data mining. I have designed and developed my own algorithm for carrying out the analysis of it. Even I'm using some of the learning techniques, artificial intelligence based learning techniques, supervised or non-supervised learning technique, and I would like to carry out some future predictions. So for carrying out, again, I require the real-time test data. So if I'm able to get the COVID-19 patient data set from the hospitals, then that will be accurate because that will tell everything, all the records will be there and complete. However, if I'm not able to do it, what is another option? I design my own table schema and I randomly or on just based on the hypothetical assumption, I populate a data set. Now, definitely the results of both of these samples will be drastically different because one is a real time and one is an artificial one. So majority of the work which is being done in the research is unfortunately on the artificial or synthetic data set. But slowly and gradually, not in India, but in Europe and US, the companies, the individuals, they have started outsourcing the data sets. So either I can procure them on a paid basis, or I can they can provide me free of cost. One simple example which I can take it, let's say I'm working in IoT, Internet of Things. Now I would like to carry out the experiment on the data set, like which could be the atmospheric temperature based or humidity based or soil condition based. So I need to set the IoT network comprising of thousands of sensors in any of the conditions. Maybe it's the condition like a Thar desert in Rajasthan, or it could be the mountainous region in Uttarakhand, any of those, or maybe disastrous like those areas which are suffered by natural calamities. One option is that I set up the entire scenario, I bear a cost for it, I purchase the sensors, set out that carry out the deployment in this scenario, then gather the real-time data which will be sensed by these sensors, and then start archiving or creating my own data set. Another option, I look out for those agencies who are already doing it for me, rather not for me, but they are doing it. So I will pay them on per record basis, and let's say they will provide me with the data of temperatures or pressure in the Rajasthan region in the first week of June or in the first week of January, and then I can procure 1000 records or 2000 records. So the choice is also always there whether you would like to have the data on a proprietary basis or on the you can generate your data on your own. However, nowadays there are very large number of portals also which are provide the data free of cost. Like we have got Crawdad for the wireless network, and there are other for artificial intelligence based data sets also. There are a large number of data sets available. So we need to have the correct data for carrying out any testing or for carrying out any analysis of the data, because then the results available can be mapped and they can be procured that yes, they are accurate. So one of the suggestive answer to sort out this problem, automatic test data generation, is going for a tool. So it is an activity that generates the test data automatically for the software and the test. So one of the probable answer which has been offered by the practitioner working in the area of software engineering and software testing for all these questions is, why don't we go for the ATDG, that is automatic test data generation tools. They are not perfect, no tools is perfect in that scenario, but yes, it solves a lot of problem of writing the test cases manually for each and every testing technique. So the use of the tools for the generation of the test data is still in the early stages. Although some software industries have been using their own tool for generation of the test data. So many of the companies have got like Rational Roses there, Mercury, many number of the tools are there. Some of the companies have designed their own tools, proprietary, like IBM has done their own tools, Oracle has got their own tools. Some of the company has designed the in-house tools for doing it, and some of them source the tool from the other companies to carry out the ATDG task. And the output of such a tool is a set of test data, which will definitely include a sequence of input to the system under the test, because that is very important that these tools are very systematic and methodical in nature. You need to have that's why they come up with the user manual. You need to go through the user manual and then go for the ATDG task using such tools. And some tools are also available that accept manually created, automatically generated, predefined test sequences and execute all those sequences without the human intervention and supervision. So we do not involve the tester. Aim is that primarily we should not involve much of a human intervention and let the tools work the job on the tools just need to be triggered once. They need to be provided with the predefined set of the inputs which varies from tool to tool. We'll see some of those tools which are available for doing this task for us, and they will execute the sequences without without, I don't say no human intervention, but yes, a very little bit of the human intervention will be there in the working of these tools. Now there are two proper categories of the ATDG which has been proposed by the software practitioners in the software testing area. And as usual, most of the techniques are divided into two categories: static and dynamic. And one needs the execution of the program, which that definitely indicates a word dynamic to it, and the other does not need any execution of the program. So they are primarily very static in nature, and depending on the tool I have adopted, I can run either as a static cases or as a dynamic test data generation cases. So it all depends upon me and what is the project which I am handling as a software tester, which tool fits me. Because ultimately I need to generate the test data reports also. So the name of the tool, the timestamp, everything will come onto the test report as such. So we may automate any of the functional testing using these ATDG tools. For example, like boundary value analysis, where we test the program on the boundary, like on the max plus 1, min minus 1, and the average. So using this, I can always test these testing techniques. We have seen those testing technique, and we have studied them, we have explored them, all these boundary value analysis and the equivalence class partitioning technique, where we divide the classes valid equivalence class and the non-valid equivalence classes. We can also use them for structural testing technique. So in structural, we all know we have got the path testing technique, the data flow testing technique, we've got a mutation testing technique. So we can use them for any of these testing techniques, and the results have been good till now. So many companies have released a beta version as well as a proprietary version for carrying out this task. And the program will execute automatically, and the test data will be generated on the basis of the selected technique. So whichever technique we have chosen, the program will execute automatically on the test data, and then we will be able to obtain the results of it. Then after staging technique, we have got something called random testing technique. In the case of the random, we go for the program execution, which will continue till the desired test adequacy criteria is achieved. Now this factor is a very prominent part for the random testing. It also holds good to the static testing technique. Rather, it's a common parameter for both the static as well as the random testing. But the static, we do not need to execute the test cases. We don't need to run the program. But if yes, we want to do it, nobody will stop it. We can even go ahead and do it. But random testing technique is good, that is generate the test data arbitrarily and execute the software using that data as an input. So we don't need to test each and every record one by one, only randomly. If we are able to do it, our job is still successfully done. And the output of the software is compared with the expected output based on the inputs generated using the random testing. Because how do we do comparison? So we say the proper successful output of the is compared with the expected output, because we all know AE and EO, which we have discussed earlier also when we were discussing the structural and functional testing technique. What is expected output and what is the actual output? So before I test, expected output should be there in my vision, that this is what I'm going to get, and then actual output will be delivered, and then you can carry out the comparison of the two, whether the two matches or not with each other. So for random testing, as I discussed earlier, it's not expensive, and we only need a PRNGs, pseudo random number generators. Even if you're going, for example, I work in Java, so I can take an example of Java. In Java, we have got a random class for it. So directly you make a call to the random class and it will generate the random numbers for you. So you can use any of the programming language which you have come, or you may write your own program for generation of the random numbers. But the one of the disadvantage of this technique is that it may not even generate the test data that execute every statement of the source code. So it may be a situation can arise because you're doing it randomly, you may not be able, you are not covering each and every line of code. So proper branch coverage and proper code coverage may not happen. Maybe each and every line of code is not properly tested in the random testing, which will be tested in the static testing technique. But the random testing technique is fast, quick, effective as compared to the static, because randomly you do it multiple number of times and you will be able to execute the program in a fast basis as such. And though it is a fast technique, but it does not perform well as it merely generates test data which is likely to be based on the probability and has a very low chance of finding the bugs in the program. So if my intention of finding is bugs in a program in a very meticulous way, then I should always go for the static testing as compared to the random testing, because static testing will test each and every line of source code in a very effective manner as compared to the random testing, which will just be on fly basis, dynamically it will, if you just select hardly 1/3 of the lines of the source code in a program. So it all depends upon me as a tester and my testing team that what suits me and what is the requirement of my project. Maybe in some cases static technique works better, or in some cases even the random testing works better. Now these are some of the tools which have been which have come over a period of time for doing the automatic test data generation. Like we have got TVAC, we have got, which has been programmed in Java and C++, and test cases are generated by applying the branch coverage. So if condition, while, do while, for and switch case will be properly taken care of. Now when we talk of all this, I hope now everyone is now able to design a proper program graph, because that will become very important whenever we are asked to solve any question, because that plays a very important in many of these testing techniques. And branch coverage will only come when you are able to draw a proper program graph. Then we've got GS data generators tools. Then we've got MIT-OAN, which has been designed and developed using ADA language. Then we have Conformic Q language platform, which is support nowadays C, C++, Java, Visual Basic. And then we have got Datamax proposed by which language is supported as a mainframe computers. But primarily, if you say 1 and number 4 are widely used because they are supported with the modern day programming language or 5GL languages, the TVAC by Java and C++ and Conformic by C, C++, Java and Visual Basic support the programs of all these languages. So they are the most popular automatic test data generation tool which are available for the software testing as a subject.